Hello, hello. Welcome everyone. So it's just still taking me a few minutes to get ready on this Friday night. I think it's the 3rd of April, 2020. And I'm coming to you live from my house. As I decided not to go out today. But everything is well. Hello, Heidi. See my dog. So, welcome. Friday night. Hoshinden Dojo Philosophy and Theory class. Following on the theme and the trends, we're going to be looking at a specific topic. So last Friday I just wanted to introduce the rough direction and how things were going to go. And then kind of put that out there, remind everyone the common goal and how we wanted it to work. And then from there, I really want to actually focus in on specific topics. So this week, I'm going to wait a few more minutes for everyone to join on. This week, the topic is looking at principles and qualities. So I'm going to be talking about how it is that Hoshin has these specific qualities that form the basis of it, things that we call the principles, and then talk about what it is in Hoshinden, what I did with that, what I would do with that, and how that really forms the basis of our training. So, for those of you who are Hoshinden students, it would be nothing new to you to understand that we divide up the training into specific sections. Month by month, we move through a different theme. And the themes aren't random, the themes are specific, and we call them the qualities. The qualities have a name, a descriptor associated to them. And the descriptors that I use are elemental names in English, in the Latin alphabet. So we have earth, we have primary elements, earth, fire, wind and water. Then we have secondary elements. We have metal, lightning, long day today. Metal, lightning, mist and clay. And then we have tertiary elements. We have phosphor, we have thunder, we have fog, and we have tar. And they form a calendar wheel of 12 unique perspectives. Each of them are just a way of looking at relationships, a way of looking at movement, a way of looking at interaction. So, one by one, month by month, we take a focus theme on these, and they form the underlying basis through which all of our taijutsu is studied, and all of our interpersonal philosophy. So, for example, March, before all of the fun kicked on, we were focusing on the study of Earth. So, Earth Month was all about triangles, grounding, relationships with the ground that are transmuting force through the body from an impact, maybe from a strike or a punch. They have really structured, super rigid's a shadowy term in relationship to the character of Earth, but it's more about triangles and form, something that's built from the base really well. And then you take that into your interpersonal dynamics with people. So the techniques are all based on receiving. They're all based on plane flying into the mountain. Mountain doesn't move. Mountain just sets itself up really well, and if the plane falls on the pointy bits, that's the plane's fault. Shouldn't have been in there in the first place. So the concepts of Earth are very stable, and they're not fast moving, they're not rapid, they're consistent, and they're just quiet, rhythmical ways of moving, ways of standing, ways of being. Structures of the body, the back heels should be on the ground, and the triangle shape should receive and transmute the force from the strikes. When you look at that emotionally, interpersonally, maybe that's a conversation or an argument. You can imagine if you are holding your ground on a discussion or on an argument, in a debate, that it's a position where you're not aggressing against the other person, you're not criticizing them for anything, you're not attempting to undo their opinion or their perspective, you're simply unmoving in your own opinion. And so your presentation isn't spiteful, it's just annoyingly consistent and tediously the same. So obviously one of the strengths for Earth as a quality is structure, and one of the potential downfalls of Earth is rigidity. When form and structure becomes solidified and is no longer fluid in any way, it just becomes rigid. Rigid things are brittle, and brittle things crumble away, to make way for the next. So that's just an example of the qualities that we're moving through in March. And month by month by month, we look at these, the whole curriculum's built on these. So there is an earth kata, a white belt kata, like a basic form, an opening form. And the purpose of the kata is not to be used in a, it in itself is a form. It's not a direct application to self-defense. You don't necessarily take the earth kata and go and clean up the streets in a vigilante group. Yeah, earth kata is designed to draw and evoke from within you the feeling quality of earth. So there's a normal, natural breath, yeah? And there's structures that generate confidence. So if you have a really strong triangle base, you'll find that you can draw upon a great sense of security. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that when you're feeling stable, your emotional state can represent such. So if you are looking for confidence, one of the suggestions from earth quality is to shore up your structure. And if that's physically, you learn how to do that in the dojo. If that's emotionally, mentally, interpersonally, then that's about things like really understand the facts of the argument before you enter the argument. So that under oppressive aggression against your opinion, you're able to honestly and consistently, tediously, rhythmically, stick to the same line that you know is factual. And there's an example of how you would present your discussion, your interpersonal relationship with an earthy quality. So if we had been still moving with the dojo, and if we were all in there physically doing class tonight, it's April, we would have moved on to the next phase in our little wheel that we just rotate all around. And there's reasons for the positions and placements of them, and I'll get into later, maybe in this video, or maybe in a future discussion. But the next one that we would have moved into is metal, the metal study. And I call them phases, just to remind us all that there isn't a particular place where you stop. Yeah, like it's not always summer. I know it's a shame. It's not always winter, and there's a constant relationship of hope and sorrow moving between the two. That when it's winter, you remember that summer is coming, and when it's summer, you kind of remember that winter is coming, and you need this bouncing relationship. So it's the same thing in the phases. The study of Earth is just a way of responding. It's one of many ways. The study of metal as a quality is a way of responding. It's not the way of responding, and it will work under certain circumstances, and it will just fall to pieces under others. So just as how Earth had a positive quality, which might be expressed in a way of saying solidity and consistency, then the shadowy manifestation of that would be rigidity and brittle, becoming brittle due to its rigidity, and then eventually having to crumble. Yeah. So if we take that to metal, the metal phase is all about forward moving. So it still has substance. It builds on the substance of the earth phase before it, and it's kind of like a progressive, imagine a progression but in a circular format. So the metal qualities are about being direct. That's about, and in multiple ways. It doesn't just necessarily mean forward. In the dojo, those of you who are Hoshinden students, you'll know that there are techniques in the metal phase syllabus where you move backwards. You just intend to move backwards. So it's about moving in the direction of your intention. And you move in such a way that your body movement is up to speed with your intention. They actually travel at the same rate. Whereas something like fire or possibly even lightning, you could say that your intention is actually ahead of your physical motion. Yeah, you throw your thoughts over there and have someone look while the rest of your body is lagging behind. That's a different kind of quality. So in metal, it's about slowly walking forward directly, not in a compass direction, yeah, but towards your goals and your outcomes. In a martial arts setting, in the taijutsu, then the metal phase represents itself in short, sharp, close to the line of attack directions. A lot of the techniques are around the line of attack. So if someone's coming in to strike or grab at the face, really close relationships. It's not like some of the phases that jump out of the way, yeah, or try to defend themselves. So you're pretty much, you're just 1 centimetre off the train track. very important not to be on the train track, but you're only 1 centimetre off. It's pretty sketchy. And it might be a last-ditch effort to drive forward after oppression or after being backed into a corner. So the techniques, the way that works is that it has to stand on the triangle structure of the earth face that we came from, and then it launches forward from that in a direction. And it uses that structure, pushing off from the ground towards your goal. And maybe your goal in the taijutsu perspective is you're in a corner and you have to go through the individual, or you're backed into a corner or a wall and there's multiple attackers and you have to find an exit or a break, and your goal is through them, and there isn't an option of run away because you're against a wall and you're surrounded. So the only option is forward, if that makes sense. We take that into thinking about it from a more interpersonal and transpersonal perspective. Then you get into the same discussion we just had before about Earth a couple of minutes ago. How could you play that out in a way that would be advantageous in your relationships? Maybe it's a personal relationship, an intimate relationship. Maybe it's a boss, or an employer, or a colleague that you're having to actually negotiate with and dialogue with. So this concept of the metal phase of study is looking at, the question ultimately is, under what scenarios would it be advantageous for me to head directly for what I want in a straight line? And sometimes you'll find that that's useful. Maybe it's probably very applicable during times of confusion and conflict. So often if there's lots of messy misunderstanding, someone comes out and just comes up with an idea. Doesn't necessarily have to be the correct idea. They just come up with an idea and they go in that, and everyone just joins them, because straightforward moving direction towards goals does have a tendency to kind of be the panacea for inertia and lack of real clarity. Yeah, someone comes in. Imagine you're out with friends, and I'm sure you all have this. You're out with friends at a restaurant. You're at the Indian restaurant down the road, and you spent 20 minutes looking at the menu. And all of your friends, you say, "What would you like?" And they go, "Oh, I don't know. What are you going to have?" You go, "Oh, I'm not quite sure. What about you?" And Billy says, "Oh, I think but if you're going to get that, I won't get." And you think, God, someone just make a decision. Kill me now. Like, you just want an outcome, yeah? The one person who just puts their hand up and says, "I'm just going to decide for everyone. We're having rice." And everyone goes, "Great," and puts the menus down. And they just acquiesce to the clarity of that. So that might be that's a funny example, yeah. Might be an example of where that kind of application of that quality would be seen to be advantageous. The disadvantageous component of that quality, we talk about shadowy concepts, but I prefer to use the words advantageous and disadvantageous. The disadvantageous application of metal could be something more along the lines of refusing to change. So when it gets to a point where you've been beating your head against a wall and you're doing direct competition and direct disagreement with others that you have to work with, well then, what is the goal that you're working towards? You've obviously lost the transcendental goal, like the ultimate long-term plan that you were moving towards, and you're stuck in achieving the outcomes you want for some purpose other than actually arriving at that destination. You can think of multiple classic things, you know. So you're in and maybe an intimate relationship or a family relationship where there might be a discussion around a very simple daily task or a very simple daily thing. And the goal might just be to get the dishes clean. And that's just the overall transcendental goal. It's really not a terribly complicated matter. But because there's a lot of other agendas at play, about the dishes, then you're constant driving forward. No, it's you have to do them, and this is what's happening, and you're doing the dishes. And then they fight back, and you go, no, you're doing the dishes. You've obviously got some other agenda going on, and you're not really heading in the direction that you think you're heading in. Yeah, if you apply that in a martial arts setting, it would be like contrasting the difference between you're against the wall, backed against the wall, surrounded by that group, and your only way out to the exit is out. So you go through the attackers, out the exit. That would be a useful, advantageous application of that, yeah? But maybe you get out through the attackers, you don't quite make it to the exit, and then you get a little bit confused and you get filled with righteousness. So you turn around and then you head back into the place where you were, because you think that now you can make something of it, yeah? Or you were attacked with a weapon and you somehow stumbled around and through the fumbling you manage to disarm the weapon. It's on the floor and you're heading for the door and the weapon glints at you and your eyes sparkle. So you pick it up and then you go with great, incredible forward-moving intention and motivation back into the fight because now you have some righteous agenda. You're going to seek vengeance. So what can happen is that metal becomes its own downfall. The inability to realize when you've achieved the goal that the forward-moving direction was intended to bring about, and then it has to soften into something else. You can't just all the time. You don't have many friends left, or partners, or houses, or money. Like that just doesn't work. So those are little examples. If you've just joined us, you'll have to go back and watch the start of that later. But those are little examples of talking about two of the phases, talking about earth phase, which we were studying in March, and metal phase, which we would have been studying in April, and just presenting some metaphors and some anecdotes to get you thinking about what it is that we mean by phases. So now I'm not going to continue around the loop at this stage. That'll be part of a different talk. What I wanted to just discuss was more about what the principles are actually about, what the qualities are about, not necessarily the definition of the qualities themselves, but what the kind of fundamental idea is that's going on there. So in original Hoshinden Jutaijutsu, Glenn presents 4 fundamental qualities. And in his grading curriculum, in his syllabus, they were set up in such a way that they were also the names of belt grades. So you've got the earth belt, the red belt level in his original study, possibly still in Ron Williams' group where he's continued on Glenn's work. I don't know, but in Glenn's original school, the earth belt and the red belt level was studying the qualities of earth. And then you move on to the orange belt level, the water belt level, which was studying the qualities of water. And then move on to the fire belt level, and then the wind belt level. And what you get is this progression of martial art techniques that were all focused around a particular quality. The quality was locked into a certain part of the body, and then a certain position of emotional process. What do you call that? Like in the endocrine system, so the Hindu chakra system, but really like the Western endocrine hormone system. So you might find that very fiery techniques are all related to the pericardium and to the heart and to the shoulders and to the forward-moving chest and the arms. And then that differs so that all the techniques that are played out there and all of the qualities that you're learning, the way that you're training yourself to respond is all in that fashion. And what I just said is really important. The way you are training to respond, the way you're learning to act. I'm sure that those of you who are martial artists, I think all of you are watching the little chat group go up. All of you are martial artists, those who are watching now. And I'm sure that you could put some people into these groups. Different people, regardless of the style of martial arts that they study or have studied, they fall into a certain category. Everyone has a certain quality that is more similar to their original nature. So you could say that if you thought of someone just quickly, just very briefly in your head, you could probably group them within 2 or 3 seconds into a rough category. You've got people who are very forward-moving all the time, often to their detriment, yeah? And you've got people, and you could just be like, oh, I could name them. Bill, Jones, Samantha, you bang. And then you've got people who would be on a different expression of quality. Someone who maybe is, they always give up their ground. They're constantly watery, always retreating, and always seeking lower ground, in effect, of commonality. And you're like, oh, yeah. And you know them, you think about them. It's not just about how they present, it's about how they respond in certain circumstances. So when they're attacked under a certain way, how do they respond to that? When someone criticizes them, how do they respond to that? When they make a mistake, how do they respond to that? And these things start to form a very, very vague, but quite useful picture of the individual's general quality that's going on. So in martial arts, it's pretty obvious, and it's not rocket science to consider that when they come and they enter martial arts, those qualities, when they naturally find those, if they're a naturally fiery, forward-moving, aggressive person, they'll really excel naturally and with a lot of natural talent at the forward-moving, fiery, aggressive taijutsu. It's just the way that is. The really watery, giving up position, lots of like, okay, hey, we'll do it your way. Totally, let me consider that. I've never thought of that before. They find that the backwards moving 45-degree relationships and the watery techniques are just, they feel strangely familiar and far more easy. But, when they get around the loop 6 months later and they're being asked to do these really forward-moving, no, this is what I want and this is how it's going to be kind of techniques, they say, they present their dislike of that, and they might say things like, it just doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel good, doesn't feel like me, feels like I'm just forcing something too much. And what I think is important in martial arts is to realize that the way that we are studying in our physical form will ultimately, whether we want it to or not, slowly inform our character development. And so you get karate people are karate-like, yeah? The Bujinkan people are Bujinkan-like. The Taekwondo people are Taekwondo-like. And that's not to say that it's good or bad. The Hoshin people are Hoshin-like. Yeah, and you can drop these subgroups of people into specific qualities that more often than not, this is how these people respond to circumstances. More often than not, this is how these other people respond to circumstances. And that's all well and good. But if you just think about that in a modern context, wouldn't it be useful to be able to respond to a range of circumstances, under a range of conditions? So you're not necessarily a victim of one way of being. If you only have the response, go down the goal and get what you want all the time, you can imagine that that's going to go south for you eventually, yeah? Either on a small scale, just in your day-to-day life, and then eventually, you started putting a nail in the wall and then you've ended up with a whole window gap that you accidentally just kept going. Or in your personal relationships that really, kind of turns out that your partner doesn't necessarily always want to be told how things should be done, and eventually you get to have that conversation where they're moving on, but it's not you, it's them. Or maybe in your martial arts, you're the one who, in that example before, you managed to defend yourself, but then your goal changed. You forgot that your actual goal was safety, and halfway on the way to the exit, you pick up the weapon and you go back into the fight under righteousness and vengeance, and then it all goes south, very quickly. So it's easy to see that if that was your only option, if someone came and they approached you and they said, give me all your money, and you looked at your range, it's like playing a Dungeons and Dragons game. You look at your options. Well, what are your skills? What can you do? And you've only got one card, and that card says kill. Well, that's going to be really good under a very few situations, and really not good under a much larger, broader number of circumstances. And if you just happen by sheer chance and brilliance to be in the circumstance where that is the advantageous quality, then 10 points. But if it's 99% of the rest of the time, and that's not the case, you're going to struggle, yeah? Or you're going to keep beating your head against the wall. Same thing is true if you take someone who they are a victim of watery quality. So they only have the option, the only skill card they have in that deck says retreat or acquiesce. Then that's going to be really hard, yeah? They're going to be just trodden on and ground into the dust so very quickly, yeah? Because a lot of people aren't like that, very happy to take advantage of those people. And maybe those people are presenting that quality under the guise of kindness or the illusion of generosity. But you find that what's going on is actually a lack of confidence and a low sense of self-esteem to drive forward to what they want. So what I think that martial arts can do for people, and what Hoshin and Hoshinden hopefully does, what my goal with it all is to be able to present lots of different qualities. So we present this round wheel of these 12 different qualities, and we say, okay, sometimes it's going to be really useful to be super forward-moving. Sometimes it's going to be really useful to be able to acquiesce. Sometimes it's going to be really useful to stand your ground. Sometimes it's going to be really useful to be manipulative. Sometimes it's going to be really useful to be deadly honest. These are they're just ways of being. None of them are right or wrong. You're going to get well beyond that you're not going to make any particular headway in martial arts or in philosophy if you're still stuck in a concept of the correct and the incorrect. Whereas if you put it more into the context of the advantageous or the disadvantageous, or the useful or the not useful, you'll have a much better model for checking against your own moral compass. Yeah. So you say, okay, this right now, it's 1300 AD, and this army's marching across Europe, and my history is terrible. That was the Black Plague. It's 1100 AD. This army's marching across Europe, and everyone else in your village, is being killed, and you're standing your ground. Maybe that's just not very good strategy. It might be brilliant in a Braveheart-esque kind of modern romantic movie, but assuming that everyone's going to die and you'll be a martyr anyway. If you think about it strategically, that's just bad strategy. Yeah, when you're absolutely outnumbered and there is an impossible chance of you actually obtaining the goal that you want out of that scenario, it's not romantic, it's just stupid to use a skill that gets you killed or that further reduces your ability to possibly have more options in the future. Maybe that's the opportunity where the wateriness or the watery quality that I've talked about and the people who are naturally watery go, you know what, I'm going to acquiesce and I am going to learn Russian or whatever. Like, I am going to just go with that. But not because I particularly believe in the new wave that this army are demanding, but because I'm strategic, and this is just the most advantageous and useful strategy at this point in time. Yeah, that's just an example of that. There's a useful moment in history, or anytime that comes up, where that watery quality of being, that's brilliant. That's a survival quality, and the people who had that were probably the ones who were still left in the towns. Yeah, who then could have the opportunity to change life for themselves or infiltrate things over a later period of time. But if you are stuck in that, if that's your only way of being, and you don't even have the opportunity of or the skills to be able to change the way that you think or the way you respond to circumstances, you're just going to find that if you took that every time that army rolled through town, suddenly you learn French, suddenly you learn German, suddenly you're learning Spanish, suddenly you're learning Russian, suddenly you're learning Chinese. So eventually there comes a point where that quality is not going to be applicable anymore. And you would hope that the individuals are capable of, one, noting when is the correct time to apply a particular skill, when is the time to give ground and acquiesce, when is the time to stand ground, when is the time to move forward, because those times are not all at the same happening. Yeah. And then number two, you'd hope that the individual actually could draw upon their own interpersonal development, or maybe they have a physical study like a martial art that helps them to get a grasp of what that might be like. Yeah, what would it be like if you're someone who is very used to wateriness? You're very used to giving ground. What would it be like to just go for what you want and step forward and drive forward through the opposition towards your goal? There's a meditation in that. There's a qigong there, and really that in itself could be seen as a vehicle of liberation. Yeah, a form of yoga, a yoke, like an observation or a disassociation of the binding or the bonding. So what Hoshinden does, and I got this purely from my study of Hoshin and this observation in philosophy, in Western philosophy, that if we slowly, month by month, have opportunities to practice different ways of being, spend a whole month practicing earthy responses, triangulated, stable, structured, grounded ways of responding physically and emotionally, and then the next month we move on, a whole month of studying metallic responses, forward-moving, driving, goal-oriented, close to the line of attack. And then the next month, a whole month of studying thunder. We'll do that one now. The next month, the whole month of studying phosphor. The whole month of studying fire, like really confusing, all-consuming, almost like disregarding of consequences, kind of under pressure. You and 20 attackers, those kinds of scenarios. And then month by month, you have an opportunity to basically ask yourself the question, what would it be like to do that? What would it be like to be like that? What could I imagine it would be like if I'm someone very timid and always acquiescing? What would it be like? What does it feel like to stand my ground? What does it feel like to have triangles and to feel strong and structured so that I'm not oppressible? Yeah. As you roll through this loop by loop, month by month, year by year by year, what you find, and I'm sure, again, those of you who are martial artists in the group who are watching now or watching the video later on, you'll have seen this in your own study. As you study aspects of these arts, they galvanize those aspects within you. And it's for that purpose that Hoshinden's divided up into these sections. And we're not the only art that does that. I can think of countless arts that are built of these dualistic schools and these relationships. So you study softness and hardness, yeah? You study light and you study dark. That's why you have to study both sides of the spectrum. You can't just go in and study martial art as the receiver. That doesn't work. You have to be studying as the attacker, as the aggressor, and as the receiver. And then their options and their choices, yeah? The next step of that comes into a moral philosophy discussion. But at the basis, what martial arts should do, I think, and what I hope Hoshinden does, is it helps you to develop a very baseline of familiarity with these different ways of being. There's some familiarity with acquiescing, and there's some familiarity with standing your ground, some familiarity with manipulating, some familiarity with honesty, some familiarity with forward moving and goal orientation. So that when you are suddenly in the middle of a conversation, or you're in the middle of a fight, of an argument with someone, and it's been 5 minutes, and you suddenly realise that for the last 5 minutes you've been really forward driving, and you realise it's not actually the option. It's not going to work. This isn't the solution to what you want. The goal is actually 10 kilometres back over there, and this is only heading in a direction that's going to be further self-destructive. What the purpose of martial arts is, I think, that then you could take a breath in a split moment, realise that maybe there's another more advantageous way of approaching this and responding. And very quickly you could go through the feelings within you of familiarity that you've developed over your years of study, and you could be like, you know what, actually I think this could be a really good time to just acquiesce, or just to draw back and allow this conversation, which the goal is gone. You know, why are you driving towards a goal that doesn't exist anymore? So hopefully that's been useful to those of you who are actually Hoshin students already, puts into context what the goal is and why it's even divided up like that. If that wasn't the case, and if there was one true way of being, one always correct solution to every circumstance, there'd only be one martial art on the planet, and we'd all be studying it, and it would just be the correct one. Yeah, and nothing else would even exist because it wouldn't have any environment in which it would have developed. Yeah, it never would have had an advantageous position. So the fact that that's not true tells us that there's something from all of this. There's something to be gained from all different martial arts. Now, leaving that aside for 1 sec, I have to keep checking the time. Leaving that aside and having a look at a different way of approaching this, because this topic for this video this week, which is video 2 of our Hoshinden Philosophy and Theory night, Friday night sessions, we're talking about what are the qualities, not so much in describing them, that's later on, but like what is their purpose, where do they come from, what's the hope, what's the goal of having a martial art that is actually divided up into different subjects, effectively, yeah, different skill areas, different subjects, some subjects that teach you about the world outside of yourself, and some subjects that teach you about the world inside of yourself, and then the paradox of finding the gap between the two and realizing that it's an impossible distinction to actually draw a line on. Martial arts, Hoshin, its goal is kind of, my assumption martial arts goals in general have changed, that no longer are we as a race, as a species I should say, no longer are we under constant physical threat from others. So we've built a society and a social system that has, for the most part, normalized and secured day-to-day interactions. You know, you can go down to the shops and you can buy things without worrying that when you get home your village will have been slaughtered. So that still happens, but generally that's not most people's day-to-day experience. So that we still study the martial arts, and I think it's still incredibly important on a physical level. We still have day-to-day fights. There's still knife fights and gun fights. There's still constant physical violence. But if you take it beyond that, martial arts should be training the individual on a holistic sense of humanism and humanity. So if we have different ways of being, different concepts of being, you can effectively develop yourself into quite a well-rounded human, is the goal. We'll find out if that works in 100 years. The irony being that I can think of a lot of martial artists I know who are terrible people, great martial artists, terrible people, wouldn't throw them as far as I can trust them, because what has happened is they've accidentally taken on their way of being that they've studied, and they've decided that this is a way that they can leverage power over others, and they've forgotten that the real goals of martial arts are personal development. So they've kind of stagnated themselves at a particular level. And I say they, I mean all of us. Yeah, let's be honest. The question is not, is this occurring within me? The question should always be, to what degree is this occurring within me? To what degree do I leverage power over others using my skills? Is a correct question, yeah. So I think when the individual ends up accidentally, or maybe even consciously, deciding that the way that they have learned to manipulate the world is just that's how they're going to approach every circumstance and situation, those people, sure, they might cause problems for others in the short term, but it's a sticky end for themselves. Those are short-lived relationships, and I'm sure that their journey in general is reflective of that. So I would doubt that their day-to-day experiences are filled with a range of different, broad experiences in the human spectrum. Maybe more to the point that they know how to manipulate these people in these circumstances, and so they only seek out those kinds of people, and they only seek out those kinds of circumstances, and so those are the only experiences they ever have. They never grow or develop because they never find anything new. The hope in martial arts, the hope from martial arts, I should say, my hope, is that you could take the things that you learn in martial arts, and you could realise that, in that example I gave before, if you are naturally someone who is super direct and forward moving, that's your go-to, that's just what you know. Maybe it was your parents were like that, maybe you had certain life experiences that evoked that from you, and it worked 9 times out of 10, and so you just developed a character where that was just what you did. But if you are someone like that, and through the study of martial arts, and I'm not talking like one class, through decades of study of martial arts, you have developed a really good broad spectrum of familiarity with different modes of being, different ways of being, and you can kind of jump in and out of them like that, because you remember what the feeling was like in your body when you were being aggressive, and you remember what the feeling was like in your body when you were standing your ground, and you remember what the feeling was like in your body when you were giving ground, and you can draw that into the emotional spectrum. That what you could do is you could realise that that way of being is only useful under certain circumstances, and maybe there's patterns in our lives. I say maybe, meaning there are definitely, but being libertarian, maybe there's patterns in our lives where we keep experiencing the same outcomes, just again and again and again and again, and we become perplexed because we think, well, I don't get it. It was that person, and now it's that person, then it was that person, but the same outcome has happened to all of them. Or, it was that job, and then that job, and then that job, and that job, but I don't get it. That one was a paper mill, that one was a gumball factory, that one was a furniture making shop. But I had the same problems with the same kinds of people, or I kept finding that I developed the same relationship with the same kind of boss, and I don't understand what's going on. It's at those times where something is no longer working for us, it's no longer advantageous, where we get to take a moment and reflect and think, okay, how is it that I'm approaching these circumstances? Maybe my approach to all of those circumstances has been the same. maybe that's the common denominator that has been at the heart of the issue. Maybe that denominator is the thing that I need to adjust. Maybe it wasn't the job or the workplace or the partner or the whatever, you know. I'm sure that all of us can think of other people and ourselves when in the past we've fooled ourselves into thinking like, oh, okay, yeah, it's that house. If I get rid of that house, problem solved. And then the next house, you're like, oh, no, this house too. Right, it must have been both those houses. Get rid of both those houses. The third house, that's the winner. Oh, really? Third house? No, okay, right. Just it's the whole suburb, right? That's the suburb. It's not me. Destroy the suburb. I'm going to move to Vermont. Vermont. That's where all my hopes and dreams are. What? Vermont as well? Right, Victoria. And we just abstract until eventually there's nowhere left to go. We have to finally accept that maybe it was us all along. Yeah. I'm not saying that some circumstances aren't changeable. I'm sure they're also changeable. But I think that if we don't actually change the perspective, the rose-coloured glasses that we're looking at them from, it shouldn't be surprising to us if we just continually run into the same walls again and again and again and again and again. And that's not the time to say, oh, everything I've done is wrong. This metallic way of being, just commenting on the case study I said before, that metallic way of being, that's what's wrong. It's incorrect. Now I understand. The true way is to always just acquiesce to what everyone else wants. You're like, well, that's not true either. Yeah, maybe it's just that in the circumstances we were in, that way of being was just no longer useful. Maybe it was really useful. Maybe 30 years ago or 40 years ago, it did something for us that we're actually only here today because of those character traits. And so it was wonderful. And we thought that meant that it was the correct one. And now in our maturity, in our wisdom, we can realize that there aren't correct ones. There's just different tools. Yeah, I don't grab a hammer and try to cut the wood in half with the hammer. I don't take my saw and start bashing nails in with the end of the saw. So they're just tools for different purposes. Now, I'm sure that you could break down the human psyche and the human quality into an almost infinite, individuated series of skills and subsets. And that's not really the goal. You could study one thing a day for 100,000 days, and what would you really have got? So Hoshinden, it seeks to just hone in on 12 fundamental qualities. Fundamental just meaning that they're distinct from each other in quite large brush strokes. So if we have the quality of forward moving and the quality of lines and the quality of circles, there's a good example. Metal and mist. So lines and rotations, linear and curving. Those dualistic relationships are just two ends of a spectrum. In between them are lots of shades of grey, yeah, where you've got kind of liney, turny, or kind of curvy but with direction. And obviously all of those grey areas are where the manifestation of all of our individual characters come out. Otherwise there'd only be 12 of us, or 4 types of people. Oh, how tedious that would be. So with Hoshin, the hope has always been that through the physical study, through the literal turn up to the dojo, get in, do your bow, stand up on the mats, start learning how to walk in straight lines, start moving through certain techniques, start breathing in very specific ways, respond to an attack in a certain way. You get grabbed on the wrist and you respond in this way because we're studying metal. You just chip away at that. And it does something. It builds within you a story that you can press play on at any point in time. Maybe 6 months later, we're doing water study and you're at the dojo, you're wearing the same outfit, the same haircut, you do your bow, you get up, you're walking, you do your walking exercises, and then you're doing studies, and then you get grabbed at the wrist, and then you've got a completely different technique. And it's the same entry. There's only a limited number of ways that people can interact with other people, yeah? So if you're going to get grabbed, there's a limited number of places you're going to get grabbed. But there's an almost infinite number of responses to that. If you want to hone down and you say, okay, in the Hoshinden curriculum, in the 12 phases, in every single one of them, there is a technique that says response against same side wrist grab, response against opposite side wrist grab, response against neck choke, response against lapel grab and punch, response against kick, response against bear hug. And you can see it just builds, and it's very almost like basis, very like the lowest level of entry into those techniques. But how the techniques play out and how you respond is what changes. What goes on top of that Hoshin, not just Hoshinden, but my study of Hoshin originally always brought to the forefront, and my teachers were constantly talking about back in like 2001 to 2006 maybe, was all about the problems, the disadvantages of the modern world for certain qualities of being. So what I mean by that is, it's all well and good if your way of being is forward moving and direct, and you're backed up against a wall, and your ability is to just drive through that attacker and escape. That's great. But in the modern world, we have video cameras. Yeah, people have phones, and people are witnesses, and there's a police force, and there's a whole thing going on here, which is far broader and larger than just you and the person that you're interacting with. There's a fallout, and there's consequences and ramifications to those actions, which need to be considered on a much more broad scale. And so my teachers and Hoshin would often talk about that might be really advantageous physically, or that might be the direct route from A to B. But what are the consequences? Like, imagine this scenario, if you're in a side alley, yeah? You're in the city, it's late at night, you're in a side alley because you're an idiot, and then, you get mugged, who'd have thought? And you happen to defend yourself. And as you're defending yourself, you're looking brilliant doing it, it's very structured. And right at that moment, there's a witness, someone who walks past the alleyway and looks down, and all they see, because they didn't see the start, yeah, they don't really know the story, but all they see is you aggressively ending this individual cowering on the ground. But they don't have any context to know that they were attacking you, or that they have a knife, or that you're fighting back against a weapon. So they run off and they call the police. And what are they going to tell the police? They're going to tell the police, this very sexy, handsome man in a black top was just beating to death this guy. You have to get him. I think he's mugging him. He was murdering him. And it's slippery. It goes south very quickly there. You start to think, there's a broader thing going on than just what's my survival in that moment. And I like that Hoshin always talked about this. So the teachers in Hoshin always talked about this. So it was the idea that, like, maybe under those circumstances, there's a few kind of concentric circles of thought that have to be considered. Imagine doing all that while you're being mugged. You're considering, what's the A to B of me right now physically? What's the actual situation set up? What's my situation awareness of where I am? What's the fallout of that? Who's around? Is this somewhere where there might be video cameras? Am I being filmed? Are there people who are going to misunderstand or misinterpret the scenario? What's the likelihood of me surviving this situation but then being brought into it later on legally, or in a legal issue? Or in what way would I want to approach this? What way do I want to respond right now when the guy says, give me your money? How do I want to respond right then and there? That maybe it is A to B, but it could be A to B via Q, or A to B via F, because there's a few other little things going on. Maybe I need to actually join together a few different qualities. Maybe it needs to be forward moving, but not, maybe the goal needs to be different. The goal isn't through the individual. Maybe the goal is forward moving to attract the attention of the public who are, 10 meters away. So my really metallic, forward moving, aggressive, straight down the line, get to my goal, involves me screaming hysterically and acting like a madman to make this person uneasy and get the attention of these public individuals, or to start pretending that I know the individual and run up to them and shake their hand and be like, we went to primary school together, didn't we? I know I live next door. I remember your mother, and start to develop a doubt within them that they might not be as their anonymity might be at risk. Yeah, maybe they can't remember. Did you go to primary school with them? I don't remember. If they know my mum, they probably know my name, and that means they can identify me to the police as the attacker. And that there's a way of using the metallic concepts, this forward moving, driving straight to your goal idea. You're just using it in an even broader social sense. You've gone straight for what you want. You've just done it in a way that didn't look like, when a witness was filming from the side of the street, you were the attacker. Or if someone, here's an example. I said this to, I love this example. I said this to one of my students a couple of years ago in the dojo. It was a Friday night class. We're talking about, I think we're doing some knife defense. We're talking about how it is that you're defending yourself in a way that it looks from the eyes of others, from witnesses and from the other people involved. And I had said to the group, I said, don't get me wrong, I'm a lovely person, and I'm lovely for multiple reasons. One of those reasons is because I like the idea that if I was in a scenario of having to utilize my self-defense in such a way that I ended up causing grievous harm, and I find myself caught up in a legal battle, I like the idea that most of the character references that the court would pull up about me would all say, oh, wouldn't hurt a fly. No, it couldn't possibly be him. He must have been the defender. He must have been the one who was being attacked. Or people would say, oh, you mean the one he walks down the street in the rainbow hat and the rainbow scarf. Oh, I doubt that he could ever possibly. And you want that kind of pre-developed idea that's already in the heads. And I can imagine half of you watching laughing. It's already in the minds of the people who might be involved in the outcomes of that. That's all strategy. And this student of mine, he was a young guy, young adult. He just looked shocked, and he said, "You mean that something like you mean you've been lying to us all this time?" I said, "Of course, but not in the way that you think. Like, don't confuse kindness for weakness. Yeah, don't confuse tolerance for acceptance. There are differences between these things, and what I was attempting to get across to the class was getting them to understand that the whole way that you go about your life is strategy. The whole way that you interact with people, the people who you don't think matter, yeah, the people at the checkout person at the supermarket, or the the person handing out the paper on the side of the street. All these people who you might not, or they might not seem like there's any relationship of them to some future occurrence of you defending yourself, or them to anything. I mean, I'm talking about in a martial arts setting, but it could be any setting. Yeah, you suddenly find that someone starts spreading rumors about you negatively because they're your business competition, or someone decides that they want to work against something that you've put out there, and so they start spreading all these vitriol and slander against you, all this, words and rumor. Well, if as you go through your life, you've been just relating with people in a way where everyone's kind of taken into consideration. I don't mean in a manipulative way. I just mean in a general kind of, I'm not being an ass, and I'm working with, and I'm dialoguing with, and I'm engaging with even, the waiter at the cafe I was at on the other side of the country once. I'm still dialoguing with them. I'm still relating with them in a way that is like a human. I'm compassionate. I'm still involved. What's the word I'm looking for? My dynamic and my choices in my language and my relationship with them, I'm not writing them off. I'm engaging with them. I'm keeping them. I'm almost turning each individual person into a unique character in this unfolding storyline. Can you imagine the power that has, that plays out in your life on a broad scale? And we're talking about strategy here. We're talking about qualities. Qualities are strategy. Advantageous, disadvantageous. Useful, not useful. And therefore under context. So can you imagine the broad-reaching effects that kind of, when most people just think of you in that way, and then this negative rumor comes up, and most people, if they know you or they heard about you or you're a public figure, they immediately disregard that, or they become your accidental cheerleading squad. Oh, them, no, that's definitely not. No, why, they were just in my cafe last week. Wonderful person. Oh, incredible. Yeah. And I can't think of the number of people who I've read about, like currently alive world stars, who when I read certain journalist accounts of them when they give interviews, there's certain people who they just consistently have journalists comment really positively about them, even though they're journalists from all different kinds of media and social media and print media and different scenarios. And then there's other people who journalists are always critical and negative of. Doesn't matter who it is, they always have something very critical to say. And I think, interesting, I wonder if the superstar, it's a funny one, Sting is an example from the police. So Sting, there's this trail of articles and journalism discussion about Sting from journalists who all have this thing to say about him, about how willing Sting was in the interview to ask questions and to really genuinely listen to the answers. And that a couple of journalists noted that in different articles I was reading that he even brought a little notebook, and that when they had something to say, he pulled out his notebook and was writing it down. And their comment about him was always around his character, yeah? All the discussions about that they had with these journalists in their articles, they weren't commenting about whatever was going on in his personal life. They were commenting about those strategic moves in his character. Now maybe he just really genuinely is an extremely interested individual, but I would say that he's probably learned to do that. He's learned that he can build rapport and get people on side by taking that kind of approach, and it pays out. So I can imagine that if a worldwide scandal rolls out, against Sting, that there's, this is a funny example, that without him actually having to do anything, there's a huge tidal wave of people who will be pushing against the opposite direction, and they'll just do it out of their own motivation. So you take that into your own consideration with martial arts. It's not just about where you're at in the dojo or what you're doing in your physical self-defense. It's not about where you're down on the side of the street defending yourself from your mugging, but on a broad brushstroke across your entire lifespan, how is it that you would like people to think about you? And you could view this in a manipulative way, but I'm not intending it as such. I'm presenting it with the hope that you're hearing it in the spirit of the person that you are constantly becoming, all the qualities that you practice, you're becoming. If you get up every day and you practice grumpiness, it's not a surprise that you'll become grumpy. If you get up every day and practice being a douche, it's not a surprise that you're going to become a douche. That's just, it's the way that the game works. If you think about how you respond, what is it that you could do? And I'm thinking right now immediately some of my own examples. I'll give them to you in a bit. I'm thinking straight away, there are some character traits of mine that I know I always butt up against. They always rub people up the wrong way, or they always rub these kinds of people up the wrong way. And maybe it would be really useful if I just learned that it's not really it's not a question of righteousness or moral dilemma. It's just that I have found that for these types of people, in response to me and my character, the way that I am with them it just fails all the time. It never ever produces anything of value for either of us. It just ends in arguments, or it ends in kind of a agree to disagree, but we won't actually go any further. And I think to myself, I wonder maybe I can try something else. Maybe I can think back to the qualities that I've studied through martial arts, and I can think of the one that I usually utilize with this group of people. And I think, well, what's just the total opposite, just for a bit of fun? If I'm always someone who really stands my ground, I'm extremely confident in what I think about this particular topic, and I'm always refusing to have my opinion changed by this group of people. I just wonder what would the total opposite of that be like, just to get a bit of a taste of another possible potential application. Maybe I could actually have a conversation with those people where I decide I don't actually know what the answer is. And I'm only giving very short responses, yes, no, because I don't have anything to contribute to the conversation. Maybe I kind of really contemplate what it is that they're saying, not out of a falsity because I'm trying to get them to like me, but out of a genuine desire to change the outcome that keeps happening for me, because I really would like to progress in my relationship with these people, for example, or maybe I really would like to actually learn. So it's just a good question you can ask. I think back to how martial arts has given me some familiar basis in all of these different aspects, and I've used that in my life quite a lot. I can think of very recent scenarios over the last few years where, and I'm sure a lot of you would know this thinking of me, I'm not necessarily, it doesn't come natural to my character to get up and get straight into people's faces and really drive for what I want and just refuse downright other people's presentations. My more natural character probably tends to be very watering, very windy, very acquiescing, very like, okay, well, sure, if you think we'll try that, I'll try that. Or very very windy, very changeable. We can do that, I can do that, and that, and then I can do 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 that. And that, all of those have worked really well for me until they no longer worked really well for me. And then when they didn't work well for me, they didn't work at all. And it wasn't even that they didn't work well, they just, under these particular circumstances, they made things worse. They just eroded what I already had. And so I had to just put them aside and think, okay, just for fun, because, it was just heading disastrously, I just had to do something else. And I literally ended up in the dojo one night. Good thing of having a private dojo. And I was imagining these scenarios and playing out in the physical what that might be like, grabs and strikes and punches and moving in these ways that I was quite adept at moving in, and very, very natural to move in. And then I thought, if those were punches and swings that these individuals were throwing, and I just wanted to respond differently, what's something else I could do? And I got up, and I had the punch bag, and I thought, what would it be like to really flip that on its head all of a sudden and super stand my ground? Like, how would that look physically? How would that look in my martial arts? And everything got quite sharp. All of my movements became really triangulated. My legs got my base got wider, and it was all about elbows and knees and about short, sharp ranges and lots of weaving. And I started to think, that just getting out on the mats and going through that process gave me a bit of a taste of the flavour of those qualities. And then next time, a couple of days later, I was in a scenario with these people again where I was being attacked, I was being aggressed towards, and there was my moment. And I sat there, and I knew exactly what was going on. I was very conscious of the entire thing playing out. I was very nervous about, the thing I've been doing wasn't working. I'm going to try something new. I don't know if it's going to work either, but it's something. So I'm just going to try it. I know this. I do have some confidence in it because I've done this in class. I've driven forward with individuals, or I've stood my ground in class. I know this. Just have to practice this verbally now. And I just started. I just did something else, something different. I just thought, well, I responded in a way that was just really like, this is what I think. And it got the strangest response. I was kind of ready to be further attacked. And instead, it just kind of altered the whole scenario. The other people involved just started backtracking. And I felt the sudden moment where I could have then been like, ha 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 ha. And I was like, no, this is just about trying out this other way of being. It's not about winning. I'm just going to try it again. And then someone said something else. Oh, but you, and I just said again, that's not what happened. That's not what I think happened in that scenario. And it was impressive. The ability, the things that changed about the outcome for those scenarios for me were massive. And that's just one example, just giving you from my own life. I'm sure that all of you at home have been through this. I know I've spoken to this with some of my own teachers and colleagues, that they've found that over the years they've been so grateful studying the arts that they've studied, whatever those arts have been, because conveniently they've found that they were attracted to studying arts that kind of filled in the gaps for them. If they were people who were super rigid, they ended up studying arts that helped them just kind of soften around the edges. If they were people who were just soft as jelly, they studied arts that helped them kind of really galvanize. And the hope is that Hoshinden can present, just touching on a very basic level, lots of different concepts and lots of different phases, lots of different ideas, so that you're kind of putting a little pebble in each jar. And if you end up in a circumstance where what you you're either incredibly wise, good luck at that, and before it arrives, you realize what would be the advantageous way of being. 10 points to you. You're a better person than I am if you get that. Or what probably is more the case, 2 weeks later down the track, after it's just not worked and not worked and not worked again and again and again, you are ready to try something else. Hopefully you've got something to draw on. You're not just stumbling around in the dark. You can go back to your training. And if that means that you have to get up and actually do some physical movement to kind of remind you, like a bit of an anchor, do that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why all the kata exist in Hoshinden. That's what each of the kata are for. If you want to remember what earthiness feels like, just go back to earth kata. That's the purpose of it. If you want to remember what fieriness feels like, go and do fire kata. Wateriness, go and do water kata. Yeah, windiness, go and do windy kata. Wind kata. That's what they're there for. The white belt kata aren't self-defense applications. They're state of mind evocation rituals and processes. Yeah, and then what you do with that when someone enters, what you do with that when someone yells at you, what you do with that when someone grabs you. That's where you build a technique. So I'm going to leave it there for now for tonight. That was fun. 10 points for those of you who stuck with that. This is video number 2, because I think it's 9 o'clock. I'm just having to check the clock. It is 5 past 9. This is video number 2. So I'm just going to continue every Friday night these Hoshinden philosophy and theory classes. I'll either be here in the wonder of my own home or at the dojo, depending on how I feel. And week by week I've got topics. So I'm just going to be focusing on a topic. Week 1 was all about just kind of touching base on where we're at with all the circumstances at the moment and wanting to redefine and re-clarify for you all my own goals and as the captain of the ship. And then this week was just the start of the actual topics. So looking at qualities and phases. Next week, I'm never going to tell you what the topics are each week before, just to keep you really guessing. But I've got a bit of a run list of things I want to work on. Remember Wednesday night, 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, we've got the live feeds of the Hoshin Qigong and meditation classes. And other than that, feel free to use the adults student study group to dialogue, put up posts, comment, material. The curriculum's up there. It's a PDF. If you scroll down the page, you'll find it. Highly recommend downloading that, and you just have a copy of it. That's the current draft 0.999 version of the Hoshinden curriculum. If you have any questions, I'll hang around after the video and be on the Facebook page so I can post back and forward. Otherwise, I hope you have a good night. If you are someone who could relate to some of the things I was talking about in the video, if any of those things are going on right now for you, because there's some gritty stuff going on right now. Maybe there's some of our character traits that are just not working right now, but they used to work, and we have to come up with a different way of thinking about it. Write a comment. I'd love to hear about your own little circumstance or story. If you've got something that is like that, or if this struck a chord for you and you went, yeah, right, exactly that. I know that. I had this thing with this guy, whatever. I'd love to hear about it. Have a good night, guys. Lots of love, and I'll see you next week. Bye.